Hello and welcome. We are back. 2020.
2020.
20
Happy
freaking
New
20.
Year.
Like my vision.
Like my
Wait, do you
vision.
actually? Are you both 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need glasses. I'm not a nerd.
I thought you said I don't eat glasses. I'm like,
That's
yes,
also
me
true.
Too. Dang it! I'm the blind one
You gotta learn
here.
how to see better, bro.
More carrots. That's what this podcast is about, is carrots.
Yeah, that's the
Mm.
title of episode 18. Carrots.
Yeah.
Ministry by
Ministry via carrots. But yeah, welcome back to Three Losers in a Church 2020 edition. Let's see what happens. I'm excited. Let's see if we can get through this year.
Yeah.
We've done half
Yay.
of 2019.
That's pretty
About,
good.
yeah.
Half-ish, yeah.
Yeah, now we're starting 2020. Fresh new
Guys,
life here.
look at that.
New freaking decade.
Wow.
Wow.
New decade, new us.
New decade, new us.
Not really.
No, we're the same people.
About the same.
Anyways, so this is episode 18, as I said, titled Ministry by Numbers. So when I read that title, I instantly thought of paint by numbers.
Thank you. That was the okay.
Okay,
That was
good.
it was a really not funny joke, but that
Good.
was what I was kind of driving at.
Oh,
So
I appreciate you.
Racist
Because
reference?
I thought I
What?
was being weird, and I was like, oh, paint
What?
by numbers. Do you
Do
know what paint by numbers
No,
is?
what is that?
Is this an old white people thing?
I think it might be. I've never heard of this until you said
So
it.
it's like you get a picture, and there's like these little boxes, and like they have different numbers on them. So like 7, 11, 18. They have a bunch of and each color corresponds with a number. So you paint like all the 7s green and all the 8s like yellow or something.
and then it creates a
It makes
picture.
a picture.
yeah.
I didn't know it was called paint by numbers.
Oh yeah, they're called
Yeah.
paint by numbers.
Interesting.
Very fitting. That was funny, I may add. Thank you for that.
Whew.
I learned so
That's
much.
such a relief.
I thought I was just being weird, and then I was like, oh wait, that was intentional.
I'm glad
Yeah.
that connected for you.
Yeah. But then it kind of turned into the actual topic of like judging ministry, how well your ministry is doing by the number of people that are involved or not doing that.
There's many different measures we place on ministries and every event, and our life too. I mean, we set goals, we do those things, we measure those against something, and numbers, for most people, myself included, I'm a numbers guy, really just are an easy thing to gauge anything against, right?
Yeah.
So it uses a scale or a background or something. And so it's very easy to do in ministry
Mm.
and in all capacities, the student ministries, worship,
Anything.
attendance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're such a numbers oriented society.
No,
I mean,
Ratings,
capitalism's all about sales,
prices,
figures. Yeah.
discounts.
And then social media, like followers.
Oh, yeah.
Likes.
So, yeah, likes.
that was an avenue I
views.
didn't even think about, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's why we're so numbers oriented naturally.
I mean, we even talk about the podcast comments. We're like, oh, we got 7 views. Look at us.
That's true. Yeah.
More than
We got
zero.
asked how many subscribers we had. That's not intentional, but it was very interesting how even like this, where this is very casual and,
hmm
we kind of do it on the side and whatever happens, happens. And we've accepted that.
Yeah.
We still fall into this kind of numbers game or,
Yeah. Which is funny because I do think of this as a form of ministry, even though it's not very formal and traditional.
Oh, I mean,
Like,
I think our 5 listeners would agree.
yeah.
Thank
Thank you, 5 listeners, for agreeing.
And that's I was told this story one time, and one of you was also there when you heard this. You were there, Chris, but I don't know who this story is about. There is a famous
2020 is off to a great start.
2020, a great start. There's a story. I know the story, but I do not know the person in the story.
I'm assuming you guys heard this in Freedom Cafe.
No, but I heard it. Long story. It's a long story about a story. Anyways.
So meta.
So there's this children's ministry person, right? And if you remember the name that we were told, Chris, please jump in and tell me because it's going to be crazy. And he was very discouraged, and he couldn't he's like, yeah, there's no one's really coming to Christ in my, children's ministry, right? Nothing's really helping, and it was just kind of defeating him, right? And he had one student come to Christ, right? And then that one student went on to become, I think it was the founder of Northfield Mount Hermon, Moody. I do not remember his first name, but I do not know if that's true.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that. But anyways, so then that one student who came to Christ then led, hundreds and thousands of students
hmm
to Christ, right? And so like that numbers game that children's ministry person was playing was really
Yeah.
all for vain, right? Like there was nothing happening.
Right.
Huh.
Because look how indirectly
Yeah.
responsible he was. Or
That's a-
directly, you could say.
That's a pretty good story.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, so the first question I wrote is like, how do you measure like how well a ministry is doing if it's not by numbers? Because I had the same thing with my marching band. I'm the only person in the world, a 4-person marching band, I think. But one of those students, literally, he wrote his college entrance essay about the marching band,
Mm.
and like just knowing I was able to like impact those 4 students, even though it's not successful by most people's standards.
Right.
Like just the fact that I was able to make a difference in their lives, and that wasn't even ministry related, but just like that's if I made it worth it for those 4 kids, then that's awesome.
Mm.
Not kids, teenagers, but
Yeah. And it's easy to this quality versus quantity
mhm.
is very interesting. And it's a very divided concept, right? You can
Mhm.
only think like, oh, I have quantity, therefore cannot have quality. I have quality, therefore cannot have quantity.
You can,
Right.
yeah.
And there is an overlap, right? Like I instantly dropped the thought of like, oh, I really want a handmade $50,000 guitar
Right.
because they are amazing. I mean, hand lay, inlet, beautiful instruments. But then there's something, homey and, amazing about my, $250, student model.
Right.
And I probably would. Well, anyways, I would definitely like the $50,000 more, for being honest. But
Oh my
anyway,
goodness.
but like, they are not mutually exclusive,
Right.
and a lot of times they're kind of put at odds when I don't think they should be, or like, is it beneficial for them to be put at odds? And then in a
Mm.
way that kind of like demonizes numbers, right?
Mhm.
And oh,
Yeah.
and so like it just kind of be like makes it as if you ever think about numbers, you're like, oh, I'm doing it wrong.
right.
Mm.
Right.
If you're ever like, oh, that was kind of a low night, that's a bummer, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should have drive to have higher attendance. You should have a drive to do better and execute things well.
Mhm.
And then there's an extreme to that, right? Like if you base solely off of that, and you have an 80-person youth group, and I think youth ministry is a very good example for this because in a
Ooh.
capacity we've all been involved,
Mhm.
and it's like this is a common debate.
Yeah.
A common conversation.
Yeah,
as
common
well.
conversation. So I think if you had an 80-person youth ministry and it was, not good, I don't like that word, but it was like, it wasn't fully there. It wasn't.
You can have a very, very amazing giant youth ministry. It's possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that whole, like, in my head, a lot of times I go like, oh, then like, it's not possible, right? You are losing student. You don't have the attention for all 80 of those students, right? You don't have the ability to do that.
Mhm.
But like, that's not true.
Right.
There's a beauty in, having 5 students, but there's also a beauty in having 80 students.
Right.
And sometimes that's the same. So like,
It calls for the mindset when, depending on it calls for Hannah's situation, right? Like, excuse me, I'm gonna make a poor attempt at trying to say what I want to say, except I'm about to puke out my milk. Anywho,
this is now the puking podcast.
now puking podcast. My apologies. I think I don't know who told me this, or maybe I made this up. I don't know, but it was the idea of just like looking at what is happening. So depending on how you look at it, it is okay to say it is good, but then also numbers do indicate things as well, right?
Mhm.
But like you said already, It's not letting those numbers take over and becoming your main mentality, right? And I think what's also dangerous is that people like to look at, due to our society and due to how we are so accustomed to using numbers as a success rating, people like to refer to quote unquote golden ages. They're like, oh, the golden age. I've actually heard that from ministry leaders. They're like, yeah, like so and so ministry was during this golden age, or like when we had like 50, 60 students and people were going out and like telling everyone about Christ and knocking on doors left and right. And you're just like, oh, okay. That was 5 years ago. Now it's 5 years later. And what is the state now?
Yeah.
Like, that's a question where I raise, like, why bring that up? Right? Why are you looking at the past when we should be looking at the present? How is looking at the past and objectifying and glorifying said numbers beneficial for our current situation? So I don't know. I think it's always I think it's okay to look at numbers, but then when you are so fixated on just like, oh, we had like 10 believers, oh, we had 5 believers, oh, we only had 1 believers, we had no believers. It's like, okay, like I've seen my fair share of quote unquote failed altar calls, right? I think I always get uncomfortable about altar calls. They're like, oh, we're gonna have altar call, and then it's like 30 people came to Christ today. I was just like, but how many of those people will actually continue said walk with God?
Yeah.
That's a topic for another time.
It is.
Yeah, we could have a a whole podcast about altar calls. Yeah.
I have a very unpopular opinion about those, but that's fine.
I feel like
It's
said
unpopular.
unpopular opinion might be the same for all 3 of us. I don't know. But yeah.
I feel, and thinking about it too, I feel like focusing too much on numbers almost comes back to some level of insecurity too about yourself.
sure.
Like, the 2 main ministries I've been involved in are youth ministry and choir, like classical music ministry. And like at our church, at least, probably a lot of churches nowadays, like the numbers didn't change much for choir. And every year I'd be like, how are we going to get more people involved in this choir? Because like we're not growing. Like the classical service is becoming less popular to some extent. And like, you know, how do I even think about numbers in a ministry like this? But then it's like, at the same time, this is a ministry. Our choir is a ministry full of people with like very strong faiths for the most part. They're like foundational members of the church in a lot of cases. They're like involved in tons of ministries, like blah, blah, blah. And like, is it really even worth worrying about numbers? Whereas when I think about youth ministry and I worry about numbers, like, it's almost like, oh, am I not doing a good enough job because students aren't coming? And like, I view, because a lot of the students, you know, they're not as established as people because they're like 15. So they're not like foundational members of a church and out there like evangelizing and in their own ministries and stuff. So I think when I think of it that way, it comes back to a lot of insecurity.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe that's a part of it too. I don't know. I mean, I never struggle with insecurity.
Never.
You know that about me.
Oh, yeah. I wake up every day just loving myself.
So secure.
What a good life.
I want to bring up a quick point that
Go
you had
ahead.
mentioned. And then I would love to get back to that, Chris. But it's very interesting how you spoke about the golden ages, right? And then in my head, of course, because I'm a lunatic, I said, well, what if we flip that? What happened if you're in that golden age now and you look back 5 years and you've grown exponentially and everything's great? You go like, oh, shoot. Like, did I have it right then?
Yeah.
And I just think I'm right now.
Ooh.
But like, and you know, like, the world may never know. But
yeah.
Yeah.
like,
But what if that golden age is having 5 students
right.
and
Yes.
you're just thriving, like building relationships, like like spreading the gospel with them. There's relationships
Ooh.
happening, you know, like that kind of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So like, and
Yeah.
like we had originally like that whole disaster of a story I told relates into that point of like, oh, like our earthly measures are never gonna mean anything.
Yeah.
Our metrics are garbage. Doesn't mean we're not gonna put them there. It doesn't mean that they have zero purpose, right?
Yeah.
They have a fraction of a purpose, but and it's like in the end, a lot of it comes down to like the person who's in charge or
Yeah.
like someone who's like a devout member of that ministry, right? They're immediately going to take a hit of like, oh, why is someone not like, I want more people, right? Which makes sense. and I don't think it comes from like that's not a bad motive, right? I
Mm.
think some of it is probably not the best motive, right? Like
Right.
I need more people so I can feel better about myself.
Mhm.
But then on the flip side, it's like, oh, I want more people here so I can share life with them and care for them.
Mm.
Right.
And have them care for me and share their life with me, right?
Mhm.
Are you ever gonna be, fully one way or the other? Like,
Oh.
I don't think I've ever made an action in my life where I wasn't like, oh, this benefits me also.
Right.
Like, oh, this is great. Like that's always been there. Right?
Yeah. Right.
I resonate. Sorry. When you said, what if the golden age was like just the 5 guys who were just there? Like instantly. Ooh, I used to tell this story all the time to other people, especially in like ministry. Like it's so odd. Like it's coming around and just nipping in the butt. And like I've completely forgotten I used to share this, but like when you said 5 guys specifically, 1, I thought of burgers, and 2, I thought about.
I didn't mean to say that.
Sorry. There was a time, coincidentally, the same ministry that told me about the golden age, I experienced the same ministry when there were only 5 guys in the room.
Oh, really?
I've experienced the same ministry when people were just like, it was like, I kept going to this ministry even though I was like, oh, no one goes, therefore I don't want to go.
Mhm.
But then because I knew I had a few friends in leadership, I was like, I'll keep going just for the heck of it. Literally, it would be me and like the rest of the student leaders. And now that ministry went from 5 guys in a room, like it's like one of those conference rooms, right? It's like supposed to be for like 30, 50 people, and then there's just 5 guys just like, oh, so how are you doing? How is Jesus treating you? And now it's like one of the bigger ministries on campus, and it's like, oh, over the course of 4 or 5 years, numbers have blown up, right?
Mhm.
But I think I think it was interesting what you said about like, I might be twisting your words to fit my narrative right now, but it's just like the idea of sometimes you want more people, right?
Mm.
But now the question is, what is the motive for getting more people, right?
Mhm.
Is it because, like, going back to Chris's point, is it for the sake of security? To say, oh, look at our numbers, look at what we're doing? Or, like, for some people, is it the sake of evangelism? Is it sharing faith about God? Or, like you said, living in community with other people?
Mm.
I've been on that end too, where it's like, oh, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, there's 20 guys. We all live in the same dorm. Gang. Like, we must be such a Christ-like centered community. And then you realize, oh, we just became 20 Christians who just happen to live in the same dorm. Are we living in a Christ-like manner?
Right.
No, not really. Are we expressing Christ's love to our other dorm mates who are not of our community? No, we're just the obnoxious group that runs up and down the hall screaming at each other, and people hide in their dorms in fear because they don't want to get in the way.
Yeah.
What is the motive?
Because the motive should be ideally like, oh, I want more people so that more people can hear the gospel.
Yeah.
But and experience God's love. But
It'd
as
be
we're
like
talking
that
about,
sometimes.
it do it do be like that.
It do be like that. Mm.
Yeah. And so I guess that I don't know if that segues or not, but the next question is like, how do you know when it's time to like change something in a ministry versus like how do you know when not to change or just trust that things are going well? Like if you have those 5 students but you feel like things are going well, do you just trust that, or do you think like, oh, things are going well but they could be going better? Like I don't know.
I feel like that's
And some of that is, I have a very interesting, brain. I'm sure all of you know it's
an idea machine.
It's an idea machine. It's a disaster up there. But when it comes to like facilities and business and administration, my big thing is throw it all away and start over. Right?
Yeah.
Like I don't want anything to do with the old ways, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very odd mindset. But like trash it all, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason, when it comes to ministries, I'm like, oh, bring it in. Hold that old way. That's the way to do it. Like we can't change. And I'm like, that's so like bizarre. Right?
Yeah.
Like you think I'd be this voice for change, but I'm like, oh, like that. Like when I've gone back to Hub and I'm like, oh, Hub worship team is very different now. I'm like,
Right.
there's a part of me that's like, that's great, and I'm really happy, and that's amazing, and that fits the vibe better. And there's times I'm like, oh, but like, is this better?
Yeah, it's not how it was done.
I was like,
Mm.
and some of that is like, that was like that is a child of mine that I have handed off.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you're slightly biased. And like that example is like because you created that.
Right,
I mean,
so-
come on,
Right.
you have to admit like that was
Right. Oh,
like
yeah.
your child.
It is
Yeah.
my
Like you
child.
said,
I'd be
yeah.
a machine, but
I too would be offended if I walked into a room and was like, "Oh, you just bastardized what I created." Like, oh my goodness.
and like that's not true, but
Mm.
it is. That was a very odd. That was kind of me processing that, but it is interesting because I would handle different ministries different ways, which probably goes to show that I should probably be involved in a different capacity than I am currently. But I like. There's always something to change, right?
Yeah.
And like I think that the whole like throw everything away and start over, but also like I just contradict myself always. But like those are both true, right?
Mm.
You should probably always throw the whole thing away, and you should probably always keep it the exact same.
What does that mean?
Welcome to my head.
Sorry. Oh my gosh.
But like what I'm saying is like, well, first of all, you're never going to be right. You're always going to do the wrong thing. But like, there's always a way to improve,
Mhm.
and there's always a way to go back to the way it was probably better.
Yeah.
I use the phrase adapt. Like you have to adapt to the culture, the population, right?
Mm.
There are some like there's also the phrase if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Or did I say that correctly?
You did.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Sayings are not my thing, but I think it's funny that you talk about hub worship, and you're like, oh, like, is that really better? Like for me, my summer camp, Project Destiny, I've stepped away from it. This is my second year not being on leadership, and every time I look at them now, like there's a bit of disdain because you're just like, oh.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not as good because I'm not there anymore. Like, oh, is that what you're doing now? Oh, interesting. But it's funny because my director of that summer camp, he actually said to me, like, there was one day I was just like, oh, like, I think it was like my third or fifth year, where I was like, we were doing something. I was like, hey, how come we're not doing it the old way? And then he's just like, sometimes culture needs to break. Like, why do we need to always stick by culture? And I was like, excuse me, sir. Like, and then he's just like, every year is different.
Yeah.
Every ministry, every season is going to be different, right? So you have to adapt to that. Like, I think when you raised this question, I was like, oh, like a simple one that I thought was like, what if your growth group goes from 5 people who are doing like really good conversation, like Bible study, it's everyone's talking, to 15 people where 5 people dominate the conversation while 10 people sit there awkwardly flipping through their Bible and waiting for a moment to chime in. Is that a moment where it's good that you increase the numbers, but if you just continue having a giant 15-person large group discussion or whatever you want to call it, how do you adapt to that? What's beneficial for the group, right?
Right.
I don't know. That was like, I feel like that's one like very like easy, like, oh, there is this, so therefore maybe we should do that.
Right. I mean, Josh always talked about culture resets.
Yeah.
He said it's good to do them regularly. And I think that's true. Like you could have like on paper the best ministry in the world, but yeah, if you're not reaching anybody in your ministry, then you're not accomplishing anything.
Yeah.
So that's what is anything that's perfect on paper ever worked in real life,
I know, right? Like any form of government.
or just any form of anything.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen an architect design a building?
I know, right?
They're good. Don't get me wrong. Architects are pretty good at what they do, but it's kind of hard to make something that's on a piece of paper actually come to life. In
Yeah.
real life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, because then at some point, like, this kind of feeds into my next thought. But like, at some point, you just have to trust the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Because another thing I was thinking about is like, do you ever get to see the fruits of your labors? In your ministry.
Mm. Oh yeah, long term, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that example that you guys shared in the beginning, that one guy who then who told you this story? You guys still don't know to this day?
No, I don't even remember it.
I remember it. But
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, because that's like, I mean, you hear about it a lot in
Mm.
youth ministry, just because, again, I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of people are still figuring out their faith, and being a teenager is a weird time in your life.
It really is.
I'm out. I know what it's like.
Congratulations,
You're 20
sir.
now in 2020. Well, in 2019, but close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah.
But like, I was just talking to my mom about this, and she's not in ministry, but she's in daycare, and she said it's like the same thing. Like, you don't often get to see the fruits of any of your labors in teaching because like all she does is she has like circle time and puts kids down for naps and yells at them when they're not eating their snacks and stuff. And I'm sure you can relate, right?
Well, I appreciate your mom because she is what prepares the kids for kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell which kids then go through daycare because of how they react to instruction.
Right.
Because daycare teaches you to listen and to calm down.
Right.
The kids who have not gone through such things, they are learning it for the first time. So of course they're going to be opposed to it. So
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, some kids come in and they're just like little angels. Well, I'm sure that's not true. She would never describe any of her kids as little angels.
She's the one who breaks them in. Like,
right.
Thank God for your mom.
I know, right? And like, she never knows how that's going to pay off, or like.
Well, you tell your mom that she's doing good work.
I will. I tell her that a lot.
Affirm her.
But, and I'm not biased at all, but she's good at what she does.
I mean, look how Chris turned out.
Yeah, you can make a weird argument based on how I take.
You're doing
You
okay.
can argue both ways.
I once had someone tell me it was like what was it, the parable about the seed. So like sometimes you're the one who plants the seed, but you're not the one who necessarily sees it grow, right?
Right.
Seeds need to be nourished over time, right? Maybe you're the person who waters the seed. Maybe you're like the 10th person to tell this person about Christ. Maybe you're the 15th. Maybe you're the 2nd, or maybe you're the one who brings them to Christ. You are all part of the journey in some capacity, whether you like it or not.
Right.
I mean, that's how I find encouragement. And like at the end of the day, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Then I don't know. I think that's huge. I struggled with that a lot when I was directing the choir and the orchestra, actually. Because I was like, how do I even gauge, like, if this means anything at all? Because like, even if all the notes are there and we sounded great, or if we sounded terrible, like, what does that mean, And it's like, well, you never know who. I've had people come up to me and be like, the choir sounded great today, or like, I loved what the song was about. And like, you just never know when it's going to impact somebody, when the Holy Spirit will use that.
Yeah.
I hate this analogy. Therefore, I'm going to share it. When you're looking, from the eternity balcony, and you look out and you see all the lives that you've touched in other ways. Like, at some point, I would like to see. And this sounds very selfish, but I'm interested, and it kind of fuels my ego a little bit, so it's okay. But like,
perfect.
But anyways, they're like, at some point, just knocked my microphone. It would be nice to like see a list of like ways I've affected people's lives, and this probably will never happen. And I've come to terms with that, but like, it would be easy, right? You'd be like, oh, wow, this is good. I've done all this. Right?
Yeah.
And some of it would be like, oh, this feels good to me, but also like some of this is like, wow, I've gotten to do all this, right?
Right, yeah.
And I think like an encouraging note to kind of wrap this up is also like, that list does exist. You may never see
whether it's tangible or not,
right.
Yeah.
But it is there, and even like non-Christians, spread the gospel in ways that they don't even know, right?
Right. I mean, God uses everything and everyone.
So like, be patient, right?
Yeah.
Don't use earthly measures.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good way there.
Yeah.
I do want to mention this though, because you talked about like a list of things that you've seen or like have done. I guess even my suggestion to our 5 viewers, or even to you guys, I think this is where like you kind of call on the importance of reflection, right? All my summer camp, after 2 months of training and executing the summer camp, we have 3 days or just a couple days of reflection where we look back, reflect on what happened, how we felt about it, and how God was at work throughout the entire thing.
Oh, I remember your reflection talk at the retreat.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't done this in a while, so I think it's really important to, one, reflect on your, let's use the year. Happy New Year.
2020.
2020. A year is a lot to reflect on, but just like even looking at one thing per month, right? Of 2019 or anything for your ministry, for your career, whatever. But just looking at different key points that were significant, talking about how you felt about them or what you thought about it, but then also looking at how God has been with you the entire time. There's a song, I think it's like had to climb to see the mountain view. All that I was so afraid of. Wow, I just blanked. But what I'm trying to say is, the song was like how to see the mountain view. So to climb up a mountain, and now you look behind you to see how far you've come, to see how far God's taken you, but also to see the path and the trajectory of how He's been at work the entire time.
Yeah.
I think it's so crucial. One, to ground you in what your ministry is for. Two, to ground you in what your walk in faith is for. And three, to also kind of distill the I don't think distill is the word I'm looking for, but to diffuse and like kind of like push you back away from like the temptation of falling into the success of numbers, right? Looking at those 5 guys, like reflecting, like right now, as I reflect on my college and like seeing those ministries or those fellowships, it's like, oh, it sucked back then. I hated every single moment and people were mad at each other. But some of us grew together and some of us deepened those relationships, which then led to the growth of certain things. And now revivals happen here and there, but it is not by our doing. Ultimately, it is by God's doing. So to reflect, to see how God's taken you, how God's carried you throughout those seasons of life, I think is important to redirect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just kind of one last note, one last note, a tangible way to do that. We all have these things, which I don't actually have in my pocket right now, called a cell phone.
What's that?
That's where mine is. Couldn't find it for a second. But we also, the majority of us who have smartphones, have this thing called the Photos application. And if you're like most people, you take an obscene amount of photos in a year. Maybe not. Maybe people don't take photos anymore. I don't know. I have an obscene amount of screenshots.
Same.
Of weird photos, right? But like one of my favorite things to do is I'll randomly open the Photos app, and a lot of them are just things I find funny, but look through and go like, oh shoot, right? Like this has happened now. Like that happened, right? And that that was God's work there. And like, oh, this is what happened after that. And like, so in that time of reflection, right? Like use technology to help you out, right? And like you have this thing that will easily remind you of these things that probably have huge effect on your life. Some things are probably pretty pointless that we take photos of, but a portion of them, right, have memories behind them. So I think don't focus on numbers, focus on moments.
Ooh,
which is cheesy, but hey,
that should be posted on a T-shirt or a cup. To add to that, Snapchat history, Instagram archives, your gallery, like Tyler said.
Yeah. Use everything for God's work.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And with that, thanks for listening to episode 18. Just remember that God is at work even when we're skeptical or don't see it. Thanks for listening. You can give us a like if you like us, or if you want to boost our confidence, because we need numbers. We're on the podcast app now, so if you don't want to use YouTube because they're a terrible platform, you can definitely check us out on the podcast app.
Or most podcast places.
What?
Most podcast places.
Oh, yeah?
Not SoundCloud, so I'm not Spotify, so don't yell at me about Spotify.
Yeah, fair. But most podcast places, you can listen to us. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell for the little notification.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, and thanks for listening. We out.
We out.
Have a good one.
Happy 2020.